the way to differentiate between other companies that potentially offer just a lip service is really take the plunge in. Talking is one thing, walking it is very sort of different. Embedding that element of sustainability as part of the DNA. Yeah, so if we think about the system that has been put in place, and I'm talking about beyond just capitalism, the way companies are set up, they're set up to maximize shareholder value, looking very much at profitability for their company, and nothing beyond that. And when we talk about shareholders, what we actually means is investors, employees, anyone that has a real stake in that company. The issue with shareholder value is that you operate almost within a vacuum. So whatever you do, it's always about maximizing shareholder value with very limited, if any, sort of concern about at what cost to the environment, at what cost to the wider sort of society, and at what cost to overall sort of the governance of the country or the council or the city that you live in. And that's why when we're thinking about stakeholders, we go beyond that shareholders. Yes, stakeholders include that shareholder group in the middle, but it takes into account the impact, whether direct or indirect, that the company has outside that core group. And that's both for employees in terms of the diversity and the ability to be successful in the job, corporate governance, the ethical elements, the meritocracy, and all the others, these important aspects that need to be maintained, because eventually people come into the company and they go out. If you think of it, institutions or companies are as just as much an educational institution as universities themselves, in terms of new people coming in and learning the ropes of how it is to work in the real life. And if they're getting bad examples from a corruption perspective, less of meritocracy and politics, then that's what they go out with. And lastly, obviously, there's the environment. Anything from sort of climate change, emission, how efficient sort of we operate in, to ensure that the company doesn't leave anything sort of behind and ruins everything. So the whole idea of this, of sustainability, is to understand that nobody works in a vacuum, and we all sort of inhabit sort of that one earth, and anything that we do has impact elsewhere. So the idea is to minimize the negative impact, maximize the obviously the shareholder value without sort of hurting any of the stakeholders, which would require some degree of adjustment, because right now managers and executives are incentivized on shareholder value, and every once in a while they have a small budget, in a way a lip service budget, to demonstrate that they do care about the environment and society and the corporate governance. What we need to do is embed that into those incentives and make it thread it into the culture of the organization, that within a generation or even before that, we'll see that totally changing, and that the definition of shareholder value may change into something more wider than that. So I think in terms of corporate communication, I think the platform or the framework that corporations have works just fine, and it's obviously used right now to market their products, communicate to their shareholders, and so on and so forth. And the idea right now is to ensure that they communicate also on these key important sort of aspects. Now, again, as I've mentioned before, we can't really blame those sort of the executives, because they operate in a system that is skewed towards shareholder value and maximizing profitability. And that's what sort of we need sort of to change. The way to communicate that and the way to differentiate between other companies that potentially offer just a lip service is really take the plunge in. Talking is one thing, walking it is very sort of different. Embedding that element of sustainability as part of the DNA, communicating that via social media or otherwise, really giving real concrete examples, not just on the environment, on the emission or the carbon, which is important, but also on the corporate sort of governance, how we operate internally, the importance of meritocracy, and bringing sort of a new generation of employees that could, improve the way we operate in that company and outside. That's one way these businesses can have a positive contribution beyond just their company and its shareholders. So like a lot of tech companies, and nowadays it's basically every company out there, data is being sort of used to kind of gather insights and take action. So definitely tech companies can help with obviously the infrastructure and the UI in terms of visualizing that data, defining each metric very clearly, implement that so everybody could sort of track, monitor, and improve, not just on random metrics, but on metrics that actually mean something, because data is very easy to manipulate. It needs to be very transparent, very clear what it is that we're measuring on, and that's what sort of we measure. Beyond that, I think a lot of the innovation that we're seeing over the past sort of few decades has been spurred due to tech companies, new technologies that can help transform the way business sort of operates in terms of efficiency and so on and so forth. And there's a few examples of that. I mean, data centers are a significant part of what we call sort of cloud computing, and they require a lot of energy. So there's different AI methodologies to kind of reduce the emissions of data centers, use more green energy from solar panels, wind farms, construct these data centers in location that require less need for cooling purposes. And then there's sort of other technologies to use, from ocean cleaning to kind of sewer management and so on and so forth. And that's where using the technological advancement and the innovation in different applications for sustainability. And lastly, I think over the past, again, few decades, the business community has looked into the Silicon Valley giants, the Googles and the others, to set the stage or lead by example in terms of how to operate, whether it's remotely, how to incentivize people, how to get people to master in a certain degree, move between roles in the companies, so they can do the same thing with sustainability, but go beyond, I guess, sometimes virtue signaling and other issues, but actually embed that into the culture, have all those elements important in the for the company, not just sort of the environment, but also particularly, I would say, in the corporate governance, working in transparency, driving meritocracy across the organization, and also setting the right sort of working environment for employees sort of globally. And then we get to the diversity. It's not enough to hire a diverse people, not just diverse in opinions, but in terms of background. We need to make them sort of successful as well. And that's why that's the important element that needs to accompany diversity as well. Finding them in the right role with the right mentorship and the right abilities to succeed, that would make a sort of sustainable change as well. I think the key thing is that taking a sustainable approach across those three areas of the environment, the social, and the corporate governance shouldn't divert or disrupt the normal operations of the organization. It's a path, it's a journey that we're going on, and it shouldn't sort of take anything away, disrupt sort of the margins, take too much cost or anything like that. I think that's the key thing, to understand that it needs to be embedded, it needs to be part of the DNA. It's not going to be disrupt your business, and eventually it's going to be improved. So understand or explain the business purpose of it as well, that a lot of the young generations are looking for organizations that have a positive impact on the society and the environment as a whole. And that's why it's key not to use that as a one-off thing, but actually embed that into the long-term strategy of the organization and follow through. And as I mentioned before, I think one thing that's many times overlooked is corporations today, again, are as much as educational institutions and universities themselves. They really lead the way in terms of how people, especially young people joining the workforce, take an example of how to operate, in which environment, in what way, whether some norms are accepted and others are not. And that's why the corporate governance and how we work with employees, how we get diversity to work, and how we ensure meritocracy sort of reigns supreme, that's a critical part to me as part of the sustainability and building a better world with organizations contributing to that.